So welcome everybody to the LegalBlock Global Regulation Framework series. Today we're talking to Joey Garcia from Gibraltar. And I first met Joey at the GIBFIN conference earlier this year, about end of February, I think it was. The regulatory framework caught my eye. I was interested in knowing more about this. And had the pleasure of meeting many smart minds in Gibraltar, actually. So, it's a pleasure to talk with Joey today. So, over to you, Joey. Would you perhaps give us an introduction to who you are and what you've been up to recently?
Sure, absolutely. So firstly, thanks to the LegalBlock guys for putting everything on. Obviously, it's a pleasure to be here with you guys, and good to see you again, Kelvin, as well. To give you, I suppose, a bit of background, I'm obviously a lawyer based in Gibraltar. I work at a law firm called Easellers, which has been around for about 125 years. So we're a long-established firm, but we got involved in the space maybe going back, around 4 or 5 years, and we were working closely with a group called Zappo that most of you will know, and Zappo were looking for a certain regulatory touch point in respect of certain activity that they were conducting on the e-money side of things. So if everyone isn't familiar, the sort of Bitcoin wallet function that Zappo developed was going to introduce a form of fiat mechanism or fiat conversion wallet to the existing Zappo platform and infrastructure. So we started talking with that group a long time ago, about 4 years ago. And the good guys there, Wences and his team, talked about the opportunity that was developing in the blockchain universe, and said that, jurisdiction like Gibraltar could evolve quickly to adapt and create the right regulatory and legal framework for the operation of certain businesses, specifically in the crypto universe. So around that time, 3-4 years ago, we started a working group. I approached the government of Gibraltar, and we commenced a working group process, which it's been a long story, which I won't bore you all with, but it has led to, on the 1st of January this year, Gibraltar being the first jurisdiction to introduce specific distributed ledger technology regulations and frameworks. So as a brief overview, if you look back at things like, we use it as an example quite often, I suppose things like the BIT license, very detailed and codified rules that exist for the regulation of certain crypto-related activity in a state like New York are very, very detailed and very, very specific. And we took the view, a slightly different view, of saying, well, because this is such a fast evolving and fast developing area of everything, actually, it's impossible to codify a set of rules in a 200-page document today that's going to be applicable and will capture everything that everyone wants it to capture in 6 months' time or even in a month's time. So we built a DLT framework that regulates the concept of a business, an entity that carries on business using distributed ledger technology for what we call the storing or transmission of value belonging to others. So that is at a very, very basic and high level the principle of what we are regulating. So it's not as simple as applying it simply to a cryptocurrency or a cryptocurrency operation or an exchange related activity. It's a principle that captures the concept of a transfer or storage of value mechanism, and it's built very much on what we call a principles basis. So anyone from any regulatory universe will understand, basic principles of a well-run business in the financial services space specifically. So we took these principles, and the principles relate to things like honesty and integrity, adequate resources, adequate mechanisms for the protection of client assets and money, effective governance, security access protocols, being able to detect and disclose, financial crime risk, resilience. They're relatively simple and straightforward principles of a well-run, operated business, but they're applied. The key point is that they're then applied proportionately to the underlying activity that you're proposing to conduct. So, the way that, let's say, a pure crypto exchange might want to operate or might need to operate, that the way that those principles can be adapted and applied to that specific business are applied proportionally to the risks that are involved in running that business, where it's operating in the world, the types of clients it's onboarding, etc., etc. So it's a proportionate regime, which is aimed, very much at the consumer protection side of things, and obviously the reputation of the jurisdiction that is proposing to regulate this activity. But I think one of the plus points, having worked on this, lots of jurisdictions in the world are talking about this now. Lots of small jurisdictions, I suppose, in particular. The key point for us, I think, is that we've been working on this for a long time. So, it's a regulatory framework that has the relevant support of the relevant government authorities. Even the banking industry that has come alongside with us are able to provide the support services to this industry. That sounds very simple to a lot of people. It's not simple to people that have tried to set up these businesses in lots of different jurisdictions. From a even purely tax perspective, there are lots of the main large audit firms that are very involved in the space that can really understand, principles of basic tax that apply to the concept of, the proceeds of something as simple as a token sale, the accounting treatment moving forward. There are lots of very key points. So the critical thing, I suppose, I'm trying to highlight is it's not just a one-off piece of law that's been published in a month. It's been a long working progress over 3 or 4 years that has brought the industry along with it, and that has brought us to the position that we're in today. And it's been done with a lot of success because, most of you are probably not tracking sort of day to day, but there have been announcements from some of the large groups recently publicly that I, obviously the public announcements I'm unable to repeat. Groups from one extreme, I suppose, the eToro example, Zappa, one other example, Huobi, who are one of the largest exchanges in the world, recently made their announcements. Oxygen on the OTC crypto trading related side of things as well made theirs. Gnosis, the prediction market platform that are very well known by the from the Consensus Group originally, are also in their license application process. There are around 30 applications, 30 to 40 applications that are currently filed with the regulator. Looking, and the driving point for all of this is we want to, many times I find that some of these businesses are extremely well run. So what they want is the regulatory framework, the approval for what they're doing, and for it to be sort of validated to an extent by a regulatory independent authority to show that they are operating these businesses to the appropriate high standard. So how else do you distinguish a garage operator on a laptop with a very good idea to a properly, really well-run business? And that is something that basically we've been looking to encourage. And to give another very simple example, but going back, it's an example we often use, going back not that long ago to the online gaming and gambling universe. Online regulation did not exist in that space to a large extent, and Gibraltar, little Gibraltar, was also the first jurisdiction to introduce a regulatory framework there, which led to the largest online operators in the world wanting to establish themselves in the jurisdiction today. I think we have 20 or so of the biggest operators in that space in the world. So the standard here has been the same. The government wants to support this, but they only want to attract the right institutions, the right groups. They're going to operate to the right level, and to make them welcome to a supportive jurisdiction that can give them the legal certainty, the regulatory certainty, the tax certainty, and sort of pack it with that some of the banking support that's often required. And that is at a high level what's been happening on the, call it, distributed ledger technology regulatory framework, and it's been done with a lot of success. Separately to that, as you know, Kelvin, the sort of token side of things is completely separate. I don't know to what extent you want to talk about that, or for me to comment on that, but I'm obviously happy to do that.
Excellent, Joe. That's a great explanation of how we got to sort of where we are today. But actually, there's this sort of, with regards to Gibraltar, there's a sort of backstory that people like yourself have kind of been through this before. You touched on the history that Gibraltar has with gaming. So perhaps, what sort of lessons has there been learned with regards to that? It's given Gibraltar an edge, I guess, hasn't it?
Look, I think so. I think that it's an edge that has to exist in smaller jurisdictions. I think the starting point for lots of places in the world, the starting point is always to try to squeeze a new business or a new activity into an old existing regulatory framework. So in the classic sense, most things in the crypto space, following certain redefinitions of the concepts of money in certain jurisdictions, etc. They've tried to move these businesses into whatever it is: money transmission rules, payment institution rules, e-commerce, e-money rules, and quite often a lot of those rules, even talking about token sales, transferable security rules or prospectus directive rules, a lot of those frameworks, were simply not built specifically for this new universe that is evolving in front of us. So to answer your question, the advantage in a place like Gibraltar is that, we can see that, we can see the opportunity, we can adapt to it, and we can do that very quickly. We can do that much, much quicker than large countries with various other complex mechanisms and frameworks that need to be progressed. We can see an opportunity, adapt to it, and try and take that opportunity. And I think that's what we're doing. I use the gaming as one other example, but this is a very obvious one at the moment for us. And
And I'll take you back to that point where you said we built a framework. How did that play out? And who's involved? Because I think you wear a couple of hats here, and that might be worth explaining that so everybody understands the different participation and different roles you've played in that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, my day job is obviously as a partner of the law firm that I mentioned, eSellers. I also sort of co-chaired the government working group on the development of the DLT framework, and that was to an extent a driver of a lot of the movement initially. But a lot of things I think are like it was for me an education process. I mean, I think absolutely critically the regulator, bringing the regulator on side and having them involved very much in driving this initiative forward is absolutely critical. So we've been very lucky that our regulators wanted to adapt to this, to seeing the opportunity, but that has also brought in people like Sean Jones, who's a very well-known person in the space, to really take the lead to an extent on driving forward these concepts, on driving forward these opportunities, and in helping to define a regulatory framework from the ground up. I mean, we're not copying someone. This is building something out from ground zero. So I've been involved to the extent that I've been able to in supporting that development of that framework. But again, to answer your question, it's been a long process. I mean, the dealing with any institution. I mean, today dealing with a large banking institution, the starting point can often be a little bit negative, but sometimes banking institutions, either don't fully understand the technology, or they don't fully understand the nature of a cryptocurrency, but they also don't really understand the opportunities that are available to them from something like an AML KYC compliance perspective. When you look at groups like CoinFirm, a group that we work very closely with, to see the technology that exists, to see the 200 or 300 risk metrics that they can run on Ethereum wallet address, and the output of that risk management system, to see the live transaction monitoring that they can introduce to service providers that want to monitor that is technology that simply does not exist in the fiat universe. So there is a process to an extent of educating all of the counterparts as to the technology and how to make it available. And we can see that evolving. I mean, the starting conversations 4 years ago, even in Gibraltar, are not the same as they were today. And that's the same in lots of large jurisdictions. I was in London last week. It was very interesting to see the interaction with some of the banking institutions there, but also even more interesting in my mind to see, we spoke at an event which was hosted by another law firm called Withers, and the entire event was the interaction of the blockchain universe with the charity space in the UK. And some of the largest charities in the UK were there and present. And it's fascinating for me to see the wantingness of a sector like the charity sector to either use the technology themselves, and we're seeing groups like Alice take the lead on the application of that technology to the charity space, but also to understand the simple things like a donation giving mechanism of a cryptocurrency to a charity. So that I'm only raising those points because those types of interactions did not exist a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. I mean, 4 years ago, if you use the word crypto, if you said Bitcoin in the legal universe, the immediate assumption was that you were trying to do something wrong. But that evolution has come a long way, and I think we're continuing to see that evolve, and we're seeing the application of this technology to things like the charity sector, but also the education space, the medical, things that everyone I'm sure on this group is familiar with. So I won't go into any of that, but yeah, it's lots of opportunities, lots of risk as well. I mean, I think we were talking very, very high level about the token sort of space, and that's obviously an attached or linked business area that Gibraltar has also been trying to continue to take the lead on. So again, I'm not sure how relevant that is, or whether you want me to comment on that at all, or if it's not really interesting. Or
well, I'll perhaps introduce the proposals for token regulation. The paperwork that I've read basically gives a 3-point overview. So firstly, promotion, sell and distribution of tokens, operating secondary market trading, and finally providing investment and ancillary services relating to tokens. The thing that sticks out to me is fairly unique to Gibraltar at the moment is the authorized sponsors, which links to the promotion, sell and distribution of tokens. So perhaps that's a good place to start.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the key point is around, someone who wants to conduct a token sale from Gibraltar. Lots of jurisdictions, lots of places in the world have approached this question very, very differently. I suppose to one extent, jurisdictions like the US have tried to move almost everything into, let's just call it a securities universe. Jurisdictions like France have talked, I think, about a kind of opt-in mechanism where you can opt in to comply with certain rules or not. It doesn't exist yet in law, etc. Jurisdictions like, I think, Russia have talked about a sort of suitability testing mechanism to see what the amount that you can make, and if you're qualified as a professional, qualified investor or not. Other groups all over the world have brought in concepts of self-regulation, so best practice principles. We've seen really good documents published by the Hong Kong authority working groups, the Brooklyn Project, etc. Lots of very good. From our point of view, those are all great initiatives. The issue with something like self-regulation sometimes can be that there are no powers that exist around that. So if you do not comply with a best practice principle that's been published by a self-regulatory group, what happens? So if you are a bad guy and you don't want to comply with any of those things, what there's nothing there's no enforcement power that a self-regulatory body can have against an independent group that is or is not complying those rules. So we thought about this, and the way that things are progressing in Gibraltar is to develop this sort of authorized sponsor regime. So rather than having each token cell regulated, the regulator is proposing to authorize and regulate a sponsor in the same way that you would need to appoint a nomad to list on a certain exchange or listing authority, whatever it might be. The idea is to approve a sponsor, and that authorized sponsor, that regulated business, has an obligation to ensure that the token sale is being conducted in line with certain standards. So the laws plan to have many of the disclosure requirements that are expected, but also the authorized sponsors obliged to maintain certain codes of practice. So it has to ensure that you comply with the relevant disclosures, that you comply with certain codes of practice, and the obligation, the legal obligation to ensure that that happens, sits with this authorized sponsor. That is the thinking behind that process, and we think it's a good way to approach this question. And again, we've that law has not yet been published, but it will invariably be published very, very, very soon. And there's as you can imagine, a lot of sort of attraction to that. So that's the thinking. That's the thinking behind the authorized sponsor regime. Separately, I mean, things like secondary market activity, etc. There's a lot of discussion in the crypto space around exchange activity relating to whatever principles of market abuse, insider trading, all of the things that you hear. So the idea is to have a set of secondary market crypto exchange, call it trading rules, to ensure that the operation of that secondary market is being run to a an equivalent or a regulatory standard that most people dealing with most exchanges are used to seeing. So again, that's the very basic thinking behind that process. And then on the advisory side of things, again, if you or I start to provide advice in respect of any financial instrument or whatever, arrange a transaction, if we're providing investment advisory services in relation to whatever Vodafone shares, we're very naturally caught within a whole universe of regulation. Arguably, if you're providing pure investment advisory services relating to a crypto asset, you're not captured within those rules. So the idea is to provide a regulatory framework around this generic advice or product related advice. So if you're making those kinds of personal recommendations, buy this, sell that, you're effectively providing investment services. But in relation to those assets, you are caught within an appropriate regulatory framework. So you're not caught within the historical, MiFID universe, arguably, but you're caught within a framework that is built specifically for that question. That's again the idea there. And there's, as I say, so far been very good responses and feedback to that consultation document. But just to add on to what you're asking, Kelvin, I mean, if it's okay, if everyone's happy, but the token side of things is a very, very important focus point. I think there's huge potential. People have called it a digital crowdfunding equivalent operation, etc. To raise the standards, or to ensure that the standards are being raised at that level, I think are very important. We have already changed our law in Gibraltar, our Proceeds of Crime Act, which is what brings in all of the AML requirements or transposes all AMLD4 and the regulatory requirements or legal requirements around AML KYC, to apply that to token sale activity that's being conducted from Gibraltar, which is a very comforting factor for banking institutions and other counterparties that you want to deal with. And it's also raising the standards on that side of things. So we have a very clear process in Gibraltar for dealing with something like a token sale. We have a very clear assessment process in relation to the token, what it does, its functionality, and the legal test of that, which we try to fully integrate and liaise with our regulator on. We have a very clear process to deal with the compliance framework around a token sale, around the privacy GDPR issues, around information that's being accumulated. And also, very importantly, some people from the space talk about, they say, oh, securities tokens, and am I a security or not? And what does the Howey test mean? And all of that stuff. People spend a lot less time thinking about the existing law that is already there. So even if you are not a security, there are lots of unfair contract provisions. There are lots of consumer protection laws that exist. There are lots of e-commerce rules that exist. There are lots of things that people should be considering. I do not think it's as simple as saying I'm a security and therefore I need to comply to a very high standard. But if I'm not, then I can basically do whatever I want. And I think, unfortunately, that the litigation and the bad stuff is going to happen. It is going to happen. I mean, if you start to think of a white paper like a form of prospectus, even though it's not a prospectus, if you start to write that, if that is being written by groups of people, making certain promises and making certain guarantees and promising to apply funds in a certain way and execute certain things and deliver certain platforms, and you don't, that is going to be treated as a basis of a contract between the purchaser and the company. So these things do need to be carefully considered, and thankfully we have spent quite a long time in this space. If you say we've been doing sales or been involved in this for 12 or 14 months or something, it's an absolute age. So we do spend a lot of time focusing on all that side of things as well.
I remember our conversation in February. You said you were getting a lot of inquiries every week, and
yes,
turning the vast majority of them away.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. We get a huge number of we get a huge number of inquiries. It's interesting that we get them as far west as Silicon Valley and as far east as Australia. I mean, it's a non-stop. This is a global momentum. It's not something that's isolated to a few key jurisdictions. We're very happy to be working with lots of the guys in South America as well, including RSK, who are delighted to support us as well. But it is absolutely, it's the same theme across any jurisdiction that you speak to. What they are looking for is certainty. That is the key driver for us at the moment. It's wanting to know that this is going to be treated in this way, taxed in this way. The framework will allow you to do this, that you can have some banking support, and that we understand the area as far as possible, even though it is developing almost day on day. But yes, saying that, I mentioned to you, Kelvin, the number of inquiries that are coming in, that's great. We also see a lot of we see some great stuff and some great teams of people. And we see some bad stuff as well. I mean, that is the reality of what's going on, and that is the issue. From a regulatory, legal, consumer protection perspective, the issue is the bad bits that are also getting through. And sometimes it's very difficult. It's very difficult to assess from a white paper and a basic website the distinction between a brilliantly run group that have gone through the right processes and guys that are just copying someone else's white paper and just have an idea, and it's that's very difficult, and that is some of the difference in or defining factors of difference in the world of regulation, being able to segregate those two. So that's definitely a focus point for us at the moment.
Okay, great stuff. So I'm going to go through some questions now. So if anybody has got any questions, get them in. We might have to jump around a little bit and retrace some steps that we've retraced some of your steps.
Sure.
And then I think we'll perhaps you can kind of finish with any other thoughts you've got and where you kind of see things play out in the future. So, right, the questions. Firstly, the authorized sponsors, are they generally law firms, or
No,
other actors involved?
no, they're definitely not law firms. There's no, the law has not been published in respect of the token regulations and the token promotion and sale and the sponsor regime that sits specifically around that. But I mean, the idea is that those sponsors need to be people who understand the space, and they're from the space. They need to be able to understand the relevancies of what's specific to this area. So, I mean, I suppose theoretically, a law firm could apply, or an associated group could apply. But absolutely, I would expect and hope that there will be niche groups of people that are specialists in the area that are able to apply and become authorized sponsors, because those are the best protective mechanisms that can exist, I think. So we're expecting to see a wide variance of backgrounds and groups applying for that. Yeah.
And that proposal's still in the draft stage at the moment, is that right?
Yes, exactly. I think that's been. It will go through a parliamentary session, hopefully in the next few months. But it's impossible to say with any 100% certainty that it will take effect from a given date. But it's definitely evolving. So yeah.
Okay, good stuff. So another question: do you think the government is open to talk about self-regulation protocols integrated to exchanges? For instance, the TPL protocol, by which the smart contract itself encloses the KYC AML as previously validated. So, from my experience of GIBFIN, I know that you are certainly blazing a trail over there, and that it's a very open-minded regime. So,
look, it's. I mean, yes. I mean, the answer, I suppose, would have to be yes. They're open. They will be open to discussions on this. The question will be, when you talk about self-regulation protocols, or this happens with lots of different phrases. People use the term decentralized for almost everything, and use that for to describe everything that they're doing is fully decentralized. Ether Delta is fully decentralized, but when the reality, if you're running a protocol, or if you're running a decentralized business, or whatever it might be, the question from our point of view will be, well, are you running? Are you a transmitter or storer of value belonging to others, and you're running that by way of business? So if you say you're a decentralized platform, as an example, but you're charging a commission on every transaction that happens over that protocol, and you have a process for approving who's able to trade on that decentralized platform or not, then arguably you're in full control. You're benefiting from it financially. You're controlling who and who can't interact with that decentralized platform. So that could bring you within the scope of regulation. So the only reason I'm saying that is, when we talk about self-regulation protocols integrated to exchanges, the starting point question for us would be, yes, that can be a very interesting thing to explore, but does that protocol already trigger a regulatory requirement? In which case you'd be moving away from self-regulation, and it could bring you within the existing regulatory framework. But these are things that need to be considered on a case by case basis in a bit of detail.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm going to ask about incorporating in Gibraltar. Owner has asked a couple of questions on this subject, also with regards to setting up a foundation. So, what are the requirements? I remember when I was at GIBFIN, mind and management came up a lot. That it was really necessary that had to be there on the ground in Gibraltar.
For something, I mean, it can slightly depend. So if you're talking about a regulatory business, a business that's going to operate or apply for a license within the DLT framework, so you want to be, let's just use the simple example again, a regulated crypto exchange. and you want to be regulated, absolutely minor management are a key factor to be able to demonstrate that oversight, day-to-day control, oversight, these what we call four eyes, have a day-to-day control and management of the operations of the business. That is an absolute requirement, not just for regulation in this space, in any space and in any jurisdiction. If you're incorporating a company or registering a foundation, obviously there are requirements for building the foundation council, etc. There isn't a legal requirement if you incorporate a company in Gibraltar to have, two Gibraltar directors or one Gibraltar director appointed to that company. But obviously everyone needs to understand the implications of, the tax implications as well of the control of that business or entity. So if you register a company in Gibraltar and you have 5 directors and all 5 directors are based in Brazil and they're making day-to-day decisions and they're operating day-to-day activities, there's a very clear and obvious argument that Gibraltar registered company is being managed and controlled in that example in Brazil, and the activity of the business can absolutely become taxable in Brazil. So from a Gibraltar perspective, the requirements are pretty simple and they're relatively straightforward. There aren't really any in a typical company, in a standard sort of incorporated entity. There are no requirements for Gibraltar representation on the board or anything like that. There are no minimum capital requirements in respect to the company or a foundation. But there are lots of things that need to be considered in the overall structuring, which have many potential tax implications. And, we would always recommend taking the appropriate advice, not just in Gibraltar, but in the jurisdiction of the principals that are establishing that entity. So, yeah.
Okay. And any sort of estimation of costs involved?
The incorporation costs of a standard sort of limited company will depend on the service provider. They can be, I think, anywhere between, £1,000 and £3,000, depending on various features and functions that may be needed. But there's a bit of a range there as well, depending on various things. But that's a general estimate of those kinds of costs. Yeah. And there are no minimal capital requirements in respect of a company that's being incorporated. Again, if you move that company into the DLT space, into operating a business that wants to be regulated and licensed, there are lots of requirements around financial forecasts, around capital adequacy, etc., that do need to be calculated, and absolutely as part of the licensing process, you would need to show that. Yeah.
Excellent. So I think that's all of our questions for now, unless any other come in pretty quickly. So yeah, thank you very much, Joey. It'd be great to sort of just hear some last thoughts on sort of how you see things sort of play out in the future. What's on your mind? Anything you want to share or tell us about?
Yeah, I think this has been developing and continues to develop very quickly. I think we have been very much on the front end of lots of developments. I can see lots of jurisdictions trying to come into the space now more and more. I would love to see. Sometimes I would love to see global standards that existed around the world at the set level. I would love to see even something as simple as European standards that existed across the space, but I do think we're years away from that. So we don't control that. What we control is ourselves. So we will continue to make an effort to be on the front end of developments as they happen, and hopefully set some benchmarks for certain things and continue to attract the right businesses and continue to evolve our practice and attract the right groups to the jurisdiction. So that's what I hope the future will hold for us, and for more and more groups and more businesses to understand the technology, more service providers to understand it and to apply it and continue for it to pan out to the wider universe and for us to play a small part in that.
Good stuff. And is there any initiatives that you've seen to get the talent on the ground in Gibraltar, because it's a very small place.
Yeah, it's a very small place. I mean, I think there are lots of initiatives. We've been in discussions with various education authorities and the university. We're trying to build the right framework out from a very young level, and we're trying to influence the education system to help build things out at a certain to build the right developer community in the jurisdiction as well. That's a process. What we're finding in reality is that lots of groups that are coming in to establish a regulated presence are placing some of their own people here as well, because we're spending a lot of time in assisting with that. We're never going to become, the City of London in terms of numbers or anything like that, but I do hope that we can continue to attract the right people and continue to develop the networks that we do have and build the right communities to support the growth that we're seeing. But we'll continue to press hard on that.
And you've always got the attraction of life being generally good in Gibraltar.
Yeah, exactly. It's a nice part of the world, and everyone who comes out has a good time. We're all nice people. So no, I joke about this all the time, but not that long ago, a few years ago, Miss Gibraltar won was made Miss World, so officially the most beautiful lady in the world for that year. So we often pitched ourselves as, officially the best looking people in the world. So that was...
Right, good stuff. I think that's a good moment to wrap this up, really.
Yeah.
And I think we've spent about 45 minutes, which is, like the first half of the World Cup. So you can kind of get back to watching the start of the World Cup.
Great. Well, look, thank you, Kelvin, for your time. Thanks to the LegalBlock team, obviously, as well, and to everyone. I hope you found that generally interesting. But yeah,
absolutely. And just to suggest that people subscribe to this YouTube channel, because there's going to be some more talks like this coming up. I think Wyoming is one of the next ones.
Great.
So great. So yeah. Bye from me, and bye from Joey.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.